Nia's so excited. Hi, everyone who's coming in. We'll get started in just a little second,
Okay.
a little bit. But if you're hopping on and you're new or you know the drill, name where you're from and what would be your environmental superpower, because who doesn't love environmental superpowers?
Exactly.
And then Nia and I will be sharing what our environmental superpowers are. If you're watching and you're confused, what is an environmental superpower? We will be getting to that. Do not worry. We have someone. For Collins, the power to swim with dolphins. That's a good one. I hadn't considered that.
Would that include diving? Well, they don't really dive, do they?
You could I'm assuming if that was your superpower, you could like dive with your head, your nose. And
increased lung capacity. So
increased lung.
Much
yes. Kristen said exactly right. Increased lung capacity.
You'll be very, very hydrodynamic. You'll be sleek.
You can twirl in the air. You jump and twirl. Yeah.
Reach.
There you go, Christian. We just gave you all your superpowers there. Sarah Jones says the power to cause storms. Interesting.
Like Storm from X-Men.
Yeah, like Storm from the X-Men. That's really good.
Excuse me.
Keep putting them in there. My superpower would be to talk to animals. That would be good. Oh, I thought when I was a young human, that I could talk to animals. I was like, oh, they get it. We know.
I wanted to be Eliza Thornberry. I wanted to be Eliza Thornberry. I want to travel the world and save animals.
Oh, this is another one. This is from Marina. My superpower would be to breathe underwater and talk to animals. That's so good. Oh, marine, like you meet a marine animal. Sophia said marine animals as best friends. I don't actually think there could be a better superpower than you just walking up to a marine animal and they're like, I love you.
I would love to know what sea lions think about Baylee.
Ooh.
I would love that.
Do we think that's actually a different superpower though? Like hearing what animals think versus talking to them?
Communicate. Oh, true. Huh. Oh, sorry for that background noise.
They have to be two separate powers, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, everyone who's just joining on. We're talking about what is your environmental superpower. So please put that in the chat. We'll be talking about environmental superpowers. Nia and I's environmental superpowers in the next. But Lisa from Oahu says, my superpower would be to fly and speak all the languages of the animals. Oh, and the trees. That would be so good. Like to speak the language of plants. That would be so cool.
That would be amazing.
Alvaro says live on extreme places. Similar to how flamingos walking on acid. That would be that is a superpower for sure. Okay. These are awesome. You guys are so, I feel like my superpower isn't as creative. When you hear mine, you're gonna be like, oh, this isn't as creative. Oh my gosh, Winnie from Philly, I love that. She saw this on a Mushishi episode, but to see the memories of trees.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Winnie, that's beautiful.
That's so lovely. That is so cool.
I love that. Keep them coming, by the way, for all of you who are just now tuning in. We'll be talking about these throughout. But we want to know your name, where you're from, and what your environmental superpower would be. These are all very important questions here on the Rise Up webinar today.
Exactly.
But let's go ahead and get started. Thank you to all who are joining in with us. Keep going in the chat. Keep telling us what your environmental superpowers would be. I can't thank you all enough for coming and joining us this evening. I have a very, very special guest this month, and I can't wait to introduce her to you all. But I hope you are staying safe, healthy, sane out there. And I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight on this well, wherever you're at. Hopefully, beautiful, beautiful Wednesday. So let's get it going. So if you're new to the Rise Up webinars, my face does not look familiar. My name is Baylee Ritter. I'm from Pontiac, Illinois, and I am the youth coordinator for the Ocean Project. I will be an MC for this evening. Basically, this night is a great night for conversation, for thought-provoking questions, and to ultimately just have a good time together, talking about our love for our planet, talking about this great community that we're all a part of, I'm so fortunate to be a part of. But like I said, I'll be the MC for this evening. So please, as we go along, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything, put those in the Q&A, put those in the chat, and we will be answering those. Like I said, my answer is not very original, but my superpower would be getting rid of an area of pollution by snapping my fingers. It would just vanish. So that would be my superpower. I was telling Nia, who is my lovely co-host, the other face that you see, I was telling her that I didn't come up with this name. I cannot claim to take it, but my superhero name then would be Recyclops or Recyclone or something like that. I'm here for that right now. So also, if you have a name for yourself, your superhero, please put that in the chat as well. You never know. Manifesting, it might be a comic book hero one day, and we might watch it at the movie theater. So go ahead, manifest that, put that in the chat. But I'm more than excited to introduce our panelist, my co-host for this really special webinar, Nia Burnett. She'll tell you a little bit about herself, but she's from Louisiana, proud Louisian. Her superpower name would be, or superhero name would be the tree hugger. And she'd restore forests with the wave of a hand. I was very dramatic, I think, when writing. I thought through them, envisioned them, saw them.
I love it.
But a little bit about Nia. This is a really special webinar, I think, because last month's webinar, or the webinar before that, was about storytelling and how to storytell. But this one is actually about a story, about someone's story, and how that has really transformed her life, but also her mission and her passion for protecting our planet. So I'll introduce Nia, and then she'll go ahead and get started. But growing up in East New Orleans, Louisiana, Nia lived within walking distance from some of the most beautiful natural areas in the world, and quickly developed a love for animals and the environment. Then when she was 9 years old, Hurricane Katrina hit and left her with an aching confusion and trauma that she bottled up for years. That is, until she decided to write about it. Nia is an aspiring marine and planetary scientist, and she wants to be the change that was needed to protect her people during Katrina and help mitigate the effects of future disasters. Well, I can say firsthand, she is that change, and I'm so, so, so excited to be speaking with her today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because she has some really special, awesome things to share with us. Please ask her questions. Please put this, really take some time and reflect during this special hour that we all have together. I promise you'll leave with so many questions, and she'll have the opportunity, obviously, to answer them at the end, but also DM her afterwards. So without further ado, Nia.
Hi guys, thank you for having me on the Rise Up webinar. Thank you so much, Baylee. So like Baylee said, I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. I have a very strong love for all things in the environment, all things basically planetary, atmospheric science, and marine biology. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Try one more time. Can you see what I'm seeing?
No, not yet.
Oh, it says that I have to be enabled as a participant.
Oh, how weird. Okay, let me get that.
Okay.
I'm a pro at this point.
Okay. Perfect. Ah, there we go. Okay. All right, here we go. All right, hi guys, again, I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and what you're seeing right here actually is one of the coasts of New Orleans, one of the areas of New Orleans, and all the parts of New Orleans are not coastal, like lining against the Gulf of Mexico. A lot of them, like where I lived, was actually inland, and I lived by a massive lake, parts of the Mississippi River, and then where that Mississippi River dumped out. So I was surrounded by lots of beautiful water. But again, with my story with Hurricane Katrina that I'm about to tell you, it was very ended up being very detrimental to our situation. So oopsies, that is not where I want to start. Okay, so this is where we're going to start. Right here. Okay, so I'm pretty sure many of you have heard about Hurricane Katrina that hit in the summer of 2005, August 2005. I remember because actually on like the 4th or 5th day, I turned 10. I was 10 years old on the like 4th or 5th day that we were trapped. So like, yeah, so when it hit, I turned 10 years old. So it was 9 when it hit, and we were still trapped for a while after that. But this picture that you're seeing, I know one of the iconic pictures people think about when they think of Hurricane Katrina are the seeing people on roofs surrounded by water. And this is actually almost to the day, 40 years before Hurricane Katrina in 1965. This is a segregated area of New Orleans that was still segregated today. This is actually the same exact Black neighborhoods in New Orleans. I was in East New Orleans. That was one of the Black neighborhoods that was flooded. But same exact area as this 40 years later. So the exact same policies that existed when I'm sorry, I don't know if I mentioned, this was for, opposite direction. This was for Hurricane Betsy, 1965. The same exact racist policies that did not allow Black people to get insurance, that did not allow Black people to live in an area that was protected by environmental policies, were the same policies that existed 40 years later when Hurricane Katrina hit. So, again, almost to the day. The pictures are scary similar. So those two, you see people are trapped on a roof. These are the same areas. Our areas in Louisiana is split by parishes, so think counties and different wards are called, like different neighborhoods are called wards. I know that's like how it is in Houston as well. This was again 1965, Hurricane Betsy, New Orleans. This 2005, Hurricane Katrina, same area of New Orleans. So again, these same policies were in place. So a lot of power structures did not change. We didn't, segregation was very, very strong. And although it's like prominent, racism was prominent in the 60s across the country. The South, because that's specifically where slavery was concentrated, the South had even more extreme policies down there. So this again, 1965, 2005. 1965, 2005. Actually, oh my goodness, I didn't even realize this. If you guys can see right here, the next picture is going to be better on the other side of this. That surge right there, that is where the levee broke, where one of the breaches of where the levee broke, right there. So that's where all this water came. Of course, when hurricanes come, they're usually preceded by a storm surge. So that when that strong storm surge of oceanic water mixed with the Mississippi River, you just have this basically a tidal wave that came through from many different areas along the New Orleans coast. And this is where the heavily populated area where I lived, by all that beautiful marshland, the Audubon Natural Center, everywhere was breached right here. And then here's a better photo of that. This is where it was. This is where the levee breached right here. You can see that the levees, it's like it's going over a little rock. So yeah, so that's my little story. I was 9 years old again. It was devastating. The media before, we weren't really, we were told like to evacuate, but again, we're going to talk about this later. The perception of it was like, it's not going to be that bad. It's going to be okay. We're going to get over this, because we always have tropical storms and small hurricanes. And people, like, there was a hurricane before, a year before, called Hurricane Ivan, that everyone thought was going to be like the big hurricane, and it wasn't. And so everyone kind of got the, perspective like, this is fine. This next one isn't going to be fine. And it turned out being a behemoth of a storm that changed New Orleans forever. So that's my little story. We were trapped for a long time. We were moved around to Houston, and then finally FEMA found out we had family in Los Angeles, California. So they sent us out there because we didn't have any resources. We didn't have obviously physical access to our money. Our house was completely underwater, which is saying something, because where I live, my house is on a hill, so that was underwater. So yeah, and New Orleans didn't get help until about a week. A week into that's some of the scandals surrounding New Orleans. We didn't get any help for about a week, so it was stuck like this. People were stuck fending for themselves, basically open oceanic water for a week before we started getting help. And of course, they can't hit up everyone. So that's my little story for this section. And we're not. Oh, I did not know I can do that. Okay. So the reason why Hurricane Katrina was so bad is because of these environmental policies. These racist policies are put in place exactly 40 years before, when Hurricane Betsy hit. The U.S. Army of Engineers and the Levee Council of New Orleans. The Levee Council at that time was all white men. Again, 1965, segregation is very much in place. And they're like, okay, we're going to save money by, we're not going to put steel rods, or we're not going to fully build the levees that are around the Black neighborhoods that are still Black today. And so we're going to save about $170 million. Based on that, we're going to save a lot of money by not protecting these areas. All that protection went to the more upper class white neighborhoods that we, of course, it was segregated. So all the resources went to those neighborhoods. And 40 years later, that racist policy was acted out, because we had this climate change fuel. There's a lot of factors that go into this as well. This area is deforested, but from mangrove forests, you have this climate change fueled behemoth. Katrina was a massive storm. It was huge. And once it hit, we really had no chance. And then, as I actually was speaking with my grandmother, who lived through all of this, Black people were legally not allowed to get insurance on their houses. So when Betsy happened, Black people were not allowed to stay in those neighborhoods, actually, and those areas were gentrified, and those people were pushed out. So you're at a disadvantage, because we're all fighting climate change. And on top of that, we have to fight climate change and fight the racist policies that make us more vulnerable to climate change. Because if I can't get insurance for my house, and if my neighborhood isn't protected, well, this is 40 years in the future, but if my neighborhood isn't protected, I'm going to be in a bad spot. I'm going to be disproportionately impacted by these situations and by these historic policies that didn't really change, because those in power kind of kept specific people in power for a purpose, if that makes sense. So yeah, I can talk about another Louisiana and the South in general. Louisiana, Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas are supposed to be protected by mangrove forests and barrier islands, what's called barrier islands. They're just basically very marshy, raised, sometimes foresty islands that are around the coast. They're beautiful, but we have lost a lot of them due to sea level rise and climate change, in the erosion of land. And one specific barrier island, this is again Louisiana, guys. This is really, really, we are on the forefront of sea level rise and climate change. This is actually an island, and there are actually people who live there. There are actually people who live there. So this, of course, you can see like the surrounding marshy land. That this island used to be much larger. You can see that it's very narrow. And that's one of the barrier islands that are really, really on the most forefront of climate change. It has to deal with sea level rise. They have to do with their island at the same time sinking because the land down there is beautifully nutrient rich and very soft. And then if a hurricane hits and that storm surge comes, again, our areas are deforested, our areas are sinking. So that storm surge comes, it's going to just wipe over this island. So this is Isle de Jean Charles, home to the Biloxi Choctaw tribe, right here. And then here's another aerial shot. You can see how New Orleans is 6 feet underwater. That's why people were kind of blaming us for like, well, you shouldn't have been in the path of this hurricane anyway. New Orleans was not always 6 feet underwater. We deforested all the mangrove forests so we can fish down there. You know, the South is known for their fish. So our fishing industry has a massive impact on why New Orleans has been stabilized. But you can see this area is basically, it's sea level. That is sea level. And that's what New Orleans is. New Orleans is 6 feet below sea level. Actually, I'm going to scroll back. I don't know if you can kind of tell. Let me see if I can get him. Right here, New Orleans is basically a bowl. You can't, this isn't the best aerial shot. Let me go back one more time. Let's try. This will be the best one. We're 6 feet below, and we are the areas around the levee is supposed to help keep all the water out. And we are a bowl that's 6 feet below sea level. So, sorry, and we're gonna stay right here. Okay. Did you want me to give a more solid definition of environmental racism or intersectional environmentalism?
Yeah, that would be great. Because I think, you know, as you're talking about this, Nia, you know, you're hitting on a lot of things, right? It's not just you know, like Alvaro says, he just made a great point in the chat. It's not just New Orleans and the people there are just well, they chose to live there, and that's that. And you know, whatever happens because that was a decision they made. But you know, like Alvaro's pointing out, poor people cannot choose where they live. They live where they can afford. And that's exactly what happened. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, I think that would be really great.
Okay, I can go off of that actually. Thank you for saying that. So there's been a lot of studies. Again, I'm going to talk about this organization later, but they found out that certain areas of New Orleans were not told to evacuate because they knew that they wouldn't be able to get these people out. So they cut their losses for those areas. They were poor areas. They were predominantly of the African diaspora, lots of Caribbean groups, just lots of groups from around the diaspora. And these areas were told not to evacuate because they didn't have access to transportation. There was no public transportation in these areas. They didn't have access to necessary communication, that too much communication with the not the outside world, but like too much communication where they can even receive that warning to evacuate. So yes, poor people do not get to choose where they live, and that played out because these specific neighborhoods were not told to evacuate. So when the water comes, that's how people, especially in New Orleans, when we talk about where were you when the water came? Where were you when the water came? So when the water came, they were heavily unprepared, and that is a gross misconduct of human rights right there. Ooh, so yeah, there were of course low income and poor neighborhoods around the country, and especially for this topic in New Orleans, were very much impacted because they were not, and I didn't know this until like last year. They were not told to evacuate, and it is recorded. We have the evidence for that. So, yeah.
Wow, that's I think, you know, and a lot of the viewers watching now are probably thinking, "Holy cow! Like, how are we not talking about this? How is this not something that more people feel enraged by?" And I think that actually goes to your point of, you know, actually bringing up and talking about environmental racism, intersectional environmentalism. If you want to, you know, talk a little bit about that and why maybe those structures, you know, were actually historically put in place. I mean, you did a wonderful job showing that between Hurricane Betsy and Hurricane Katrina, when that should have been a red flag, that should have been a, hey, wait a second, we're not in a good place. It wasn't. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to give kind of like what, for people who are watching, like, maybe this is the first time that they're hearing about this
Mhm.
concept or this term. What's like a definition to you for environmental racism?
For me, it would be the policies or lack thereof that disproportionately impact communities of color in the United States that would put them in situations where they live, where they more so live near landfills, where they're more so live near flame retardant uh, factories that leak. Like, for example, where they more so live in areas where they would have to move from sea level rise, from massive natural disasters, et cetera, et cetera. So where these policies are purposely put in place so that either that the local government or the government can save some money, or because people think that the alarms won't be raised, which is what's happening with Cancer Alley, Louisiana. So it's these policies that will, again, uh, impact people negatively based on their skin tone or based on their cultural background.
Yeah, and that's what you were just saying about, the first in Hurricane Betsy. I mean, having the conversation with your grandma who was like, we actually weren't able to get any type of insurance. I
Yeah.
think that's a stark example of
Yes.
something that's put in place to
Yes.
disproportionately affect a community of people in
Mhm.
the wake of you know big storms like Katrina and Betsy, but also other environmental factors, which
Yes.
I think
Exactly.
you're going to talk a little bit later about. So I don't want to kind of steal this conversation, but
Uh-huh.
yeah.
What was the
So
question?
no. I don't know if you want to continue and keep going.
Okay. Oh yeah, yeah. So I'll give some examples. Segregation. All right, segregation. So these, like you saw from examples, these areas were still mostly Black today. So those areas are going to still, and these areas are not going to be updated the way areas that have more resources will be. And again, this whole situation with the insurance, when you're legally not to do, when it's legal for you to be discriminated against, and it's legal for you not to have these protections, that puts you more at risk. So again, the history of the Black people, this is specifically the Ninth Ward, were not allowed to, legally not allowed to have insurance on their homes or allowed to prove that those were their homes. So when something that like a hurricane comes through, what do you do if you can't even legally prove that that's your home, or or you don't have legal insurance to show that, hey, I'm protected here, this is actually where I live. And policies like that are unfortunately kind of very rampant across this country and the world, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, no, and that's I don't know. I love you have some wonderful examples also.
Mhm.
I think maybe perhaps the people watching and myself, it's like, oh, like what can we do? What is there? This feels so big. So
Yeah,
definitely if I think you actually have a couple next examples of things
I
people
do. I can do Cancer. I'll start with Cancer Alley if that is good with
yeah,
you.
that sounds great.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Perfect. So Cancer Alley, again, unfortunately, this is also in Louisiana, is an 85-mile stretch between of different plants like this, between it's these plants, and then you can see the Mississippi River up at the top. So, and then these are there are neighborhoods all throughout this, and for years, it's 85 miles, and the people in this area, it is in mostly black neighborhoods, are between 50 to 800 times more likely to get cancer. That's why it's called Cancer Alley. Now, you're probably thinking, well, this has been happening for a few decades. Why haven't we heard about this, or why hasn't anyone done anything about that? And that is because these people, these neighborhoods have been making legal cases against these plants, but the courts and the courts down there are like, hey, we don't see any evidence. No matter how many times they brought the evidence, they're like, we see absolutely no evidence of you guys contracting cancer from these plants. Um, so that's another thing, is that justice buffer of racial bias or racism is like, oh, well, we've been doing this for a long time. We're taking all the appropriate channels that you're telling us to take, but you keep moving the line on what's appropriate. And then you keep saying that we have no evidence. We have no evidence. And so what do we do? So it's very, very frustrating. Again, you can't just, if you don't have the resources to move, you don't have the resources to move. And then you also have to try to get our healthcare system. You have to take care of yourself if you have cancer, unfortunately. So these areas, I have it. Here it is, the 85-mile stretch of over 200 plants, different plants, oil refineries, et cetera, et cetera. And here is, okay, you cannot see it from here, but the Mississippi River, this is between the Mississippi River, and then the plants act as like another wall almost. So yeah, this is present. This is considered one of the worst. You can see, oh, I see ExxonMobil in the top left corner. This is considered one of the worst environmental injustice cases in the country, which is saying something because we do not treat our environment and the people negatively impacted well. So yeah, this is there is one petrochemical plant for every 656 people down here, and that's insane. So here's, I think I have more pictures. So this is going on nonstop for decades, and they've been going to the courts trying to get legal action to reverse this or to do something about it. This is, of course, destroying the environment. Of course, you have the Mississippi River right there, so all the fishing we're doing downstream, that is just great. We're consuming that. This is between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and the courts are like, well, you have no evidence. Oh, you have no evidence of flooding. Oh, you have no evidence that this is causing cancer. So that's a lot. That's what from my research, that's what I've seen. And it's not even focusing on Black communities, just communities who are impacted by this, so that companies can save a few bucks. Courts are like, well, I see no evidence that this is causing cancer. Oh, your child has extreme asthma. I still see no evidence. Like, it doesn't, there's again, the justice aspect is also something we have to tackle for these environmental injustice issues, because okay, we have all the resources and evidence, and then we take it to the justice system and they're like, no, we're going to block that because, oh, we probably are making money from this as well for certain people. So it's frustratingly complicated. So this is happening also. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and this is now, right, Nia? This is
now.
Yeah.
This is current. This is current day. This hasn't been happening for a while. This is still going on today. This is still pumping into the atmosphere today. This is still pumping into people's lungs today. This is happening now. It is considered one of the most just disgusting environmental injustice and racism examples in the country.
There are people who live around there.
Yes. And yes. And people are like, well, again, like what was said earlier, well, why don't they just get up and move? Well, it's more complicated than that. It is not that simple, because, oh my goodness, what if they, like, the health implications of this is not a healthy area, number one. This is not a healthy area. And then it's just, you shouldn't have to move your entire family, which we're going to talk about with Alde Jean Charles, to live safely, if that's what, if that makes sense. Like the climate refugee or the environmental migrant terms we were looking up. You shouldn't have to do this, but this unfortunately is the world that we live in, and the courts are not taking these cases. Same with like the EPA. When we were doing research for this, we found that like the EPA has an Office of Civil Rights, but all the cases in the last 22 to 25 years have been dismissed. So it's like, we had these resources, we have these channels that were put in place. Okay, we fought to put these in place. Now that they're in place, you guys are still making it difficult for us to even be heard if you're just going to continuously dismiss the case. So that's where the frustration in the environmental work comes from.
No, and not to mention the barriers to even getting to that point where you are. Yeah. I mean, talk about just even knowing that those resources exist, right? Yeah. Like that is already a barrier, let alone getting to the point where you are actually saying, hey, wait a second, something needs to happen, action needs to happen, and just being dismissed. Like, to even get to that point, there's already so many barriers put in place, and it's just really it yeah, you'll get to it, but it's just
I'm good to that. Yeah.
another thing too, maybe I thought would be helpful for those watching is you know, kind of unpacking what it means to be a climate migrant or a climate refugee. I think anybody maybe watching, perhaps maybe this is the first time you're hearing that term, or maybe you've heard that term before on the news, or you know, in reading about it. So didn't know, Nia, kind of your perspective on what it is to be, or what is a climate refugee, you know, an environmental migrant, a climate migrant.
I do have the definition written down. So the definition that I found was that it's a person or a group of people who are forced to flee due to sudden changes such as sea level rise, extreme weather events, drought, and water insecurity. And I noticed that it didn't give like a specific moving either from within your country or from country to country. And that has always been my issue growing up, and my frustration is like, well, this is a huge thing that's happening, and like people are treating it like, I feel like we were talking about, like people have to see it as such a cinematic event, or something that's othered, something that happens over there that doesn't happen over here, when it is very much happening within this country as well. It's going to impact all of us. So I struggled with that when I first heard this term. I was like, well, I went through all of this. I had to leave. We were trapped, and then we were rescued. That area still experiences horrible things post Katrina, water insecurity being one, land insecurity being one, and how the programs that we were put into, and how we were we didn't have a say in where we really went. That was a huge part of, I was like, well, why aren't you guys paying attention to these groups within the United States as well who's being impacted by this? Because this isn't, again, this isn't a problem that's happening over there. That happens to them. That happens in other countries. No, it's happening off of our own coast. It's happening off of the coast of Mexico. It's the ghost of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico. So this is happening to us, guys. And I don't know. I feel like when it leaves the news cycle, it's out of people's minds, because we don't live in a world where we're seen as a part of the ecosystem. We're seen as we're separate from the ecosystems that we directly impact now. If that answered your question, that was kind of a rant.
No, that was perfect. I also think that 100%. That's why we're talking about Katrina now. You know, like, I think it's so critical, and Hurricane Betsy, I mean, for that matter, because these stories should not, because they're no longer in the news cycle and other things are happening. Yeah, the world right now that we're in, that deserves a lot of media attention. But you know, your story, for example, you know, the first time we met, that was something that I told you, that you know, I had heard a lot and watched a lot about Hurricane Katrina, but I don't know if I actually knew the stories of those people. And I think for newer generations, I mean, we're about the same age, and so I would have been around 9 or 10 as well. But there are such critical points from it that we need to continue talking about, remembering, learning from, especially as young activists. We can't let it go and live as a thing of the past, when the things that we need to do to prevent future things from happening, we can learn from Hurricane Katrina. We can learn from these events.
Yeah, and it's like, if we knew about this, I never knew about Hurricane Betsy until I was doing how I even found this information. I was like, okay, I'm going to write about my story for my senior thesis, and I did all this research. I was like, well, we could have done so much to prepare if we would have known like what's happening in the past, studying the history of why these policies were put in place, analyzing the eras of our modern day environmental policies. Then we could have done something to prevent this, to prevent what happened, to prevent the loss of life, and to prevent the destruction of these environmental areas. So that's what's happening with the Superfund sites. I'll talk about that a little bit. I don't have an image of that, but I'll just put it on this night. Oh, that's not nice. I'm just gonna leave it here. And if you don't know what a Superfund site is, Superfund sites are usually old factories, let's say old oil refineries, old flame retardant factories, areas that, factories that produce, actually, this is a great example, that produce, things that take a toll on the environment to make. And Chernobyl, there we go. Chernobyl is probably one of the most well-known examples of this environmental disaster. Areas like that produce things that if it gets out of control, the contents of that factory, it will be very devastating for the surrounding area. I still cannot find a solid number on how many Superfund sites we have around the country, but specifically in the South, specifically in Brunswick, Georgia, what I was reading about and potentially studying on in the future is that there's a Superfund oil refinery that has been in place since 1918, 102 years ago. It's been leaking. That's what I'm saying. It's been leaking since 1918 into the Atlantic Ocean and the surrounding marsh areas, and it was shut down in 1994, I want to say. And so what happened, a lot of people recently went to jail for this, is that they said that they cleaned up the area. They cleaned up the area, and that's when it's called a Superfund site, when you have cleaned up all these past chemicals and oils from the past. But they did not. And it has been leaking into the Atlantic Ocean since 1918, but then especially since 1994 for the last 25, 26 years, and without anyone really monitoring it. So we're recently getting information on this. This is very, very recent. So a lot of people went to jail because they didn't think anyone would look into it or care. And situations like this happen a lot because in the surrounding area, the surrounding neighborhoods are being impacted by this, let alone the surrounding ecosystems. So our marshland is a sponge. It soaks up all of that. Every time there's an oil spill, a chemical spill, anytime there's something like that, our marshes, our amazing marshes, hold on to all that for a very long time because that's their job. They mitigate storm surges. They act as a sponge. They soak up water. They're going to soak up oil spills and chemical spills. So Superfund sites around the country is a great, I don't want to say great, but that is an example of these environmental injustices that's happening, and it impacts a lot of different communities as well.
And what was the name of that one? Someone just asked in the chat the name of that specific one.
I know the area.
Yeah.
Do I have it written down? It's in Brunswick, Georgia, and it's also leaking mercury. That's great. And Brunswick, Georgia. So just look up Brunswick, Georgia Superfund sites, and you will find information on that. And it's been leaking into the ocean since 1918. It was closed in 1994, and it still has been leaking into the ocean. I know in 2015 they noticed that something was off, and a lot of people again went to jail for this. But
wow.
Yeah.
And I do want to encourage anyone watching right now too, you can actually Google Superfund site, and it's not super fun, it's super fund.
Yeah.
Superfund site. You can Google those around your area actually and see where they're at. Like Nia was saying, there are areas that have been covered up that were, like she said previously, plants or things that created some of the worst pollutants on our planet. Brunswick, Georgia. Anyway.
I do have two more small examples.
Yeah.
The big one that got a lot of attention is called Love Canal, New York, in Niagara, New York. That's kind of like the poster child for this. And then 3 Mile Island. Those are two case studies you can look into. They are not easy reads. So yeah, those are great examples for Superfund sites. And then again, Chernobyl is related to that as well.
Yeah, I definitely encourage you guys, literally look them up in your area, see where they're at. I did this actually, one of my college assignments was to see the closest Superfund site from you, and it was 2 minutes away. I literally walked past it every single day.
Okay.
Literally look them up. There are more than you would think. And it's a great way to also be aware in your community, because what you can ultimately do is, sometimes they don't secure them properly, and that's it's always so critical. And Nia will give you a couple more examples of things that you all can do. You know, if you're really, I see you all in the chat going, like what can we do? And so
Yeah.
we'll give you some great examples, but that's another thing, is looking into it, knowing what your community is based on, knowing what's around you is so powerful.
Yeah. Just knowing, because this, again, I didn't find out about this until recent, and this is very important to all of us. Just, again, yes, look up what Superfund sites are in your area. Look up how they were if they were properly cleaned up, if there are any ongoing cases for them, because that might explain some other environmental issues if your area is known for other environmental issues. I'm going to scroll down now. Hopefully I picked the right, nope, I missed it by 2. Okay, so what can you guys do? There are a few environmental justice groups you can get involved in, even if it's just donating, even if it's just learning from them so that you can know how you can better get involved. And then I do have one that's even more environmentally focused. This is a mangrove forest. This is another reason why our Hurricane Katrina and Betsy were so bad, is because our coast had been heavily deforested from these beautiful coastal they're called blue forests, mangrove forests. They suck up all that water, and they slow down and mitigate or completely absorb the storm surge. Again, hurricanes existed before before we did. So like, hurricanes have been around for a long time. It's not that we put ourselves in the way of these tragedies. It's just that we are degrading the environment, having all these unjust policies, and then when climate change issues happen, it just compounds all of that. If you're already from a vulnerable group, when these issues happen, look at the pandemic. It's going to always impact the most vulnerable group. So another side note, Cancer Alley, Louisiana, unfortunately, is really, really getting hit hard by the pandemic. So I'm going to exit, and then we're going to, you guys can see that, right? Yes.
No. No, man. Yay, we're good.
Okay. Oh gosh. Okay.
No,
okay.
we're good.
So here is a list from the NAACP of environmental and climate justice resource organizations that you can get involved in. This top one right here, the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice at Dillard University in New Orleans, Louisiana. That's where I got a lot of my information from. That's how I found out how my specific neighborhood was impacted. Although it was a Black neighborhood, it wasn't necessarily considered low income. It was middle to upper middle class. And that's how I found out, like, race really trumped the other issues when it came to Hurricane Katrina. The only one, so this is a great list. I highly recommend, especially the Deep South Center and then the Indigenous Environmental Network. You can donate to both or get involved in both. But here, there's also some youth and college key organizations, like the Hip Hop Caucus down here. But the only one I wouldn't recommend donating to is ironically, the Environmental Protection Agency, because the Civil Rights Office has dismissed the cases for the last 25 years. So that you can still get information from them, but their website is kind of a front. Yes, I'm throwing shade, but that is what's happening. And I can show you guys one of the websites. Oh no, do I have to? I know what I'm doing. No, every time I go to the top. Okay, here we go. So here's the Indigenous Environmental Network that you guys can get involved in right here. You can sign up for emails. You can see if there's any local chapters in your area. And if you want to donate, you can. And they, again, provide lots of environmental information. And here's the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. I believe they have an Instagram as well. But you get email updates. You can join their fight, join the fight. This one's, again, located in the South, but we can see if there's any chapters in your area. And then there is an organization called MAP, which is the Mangrove Action Project that you can get involved in to help, again, restore these coasts if you would like. Mangroves are extremely important to our climate overall. They are carbon sinks. We have deforested them. They cannot mitigate carbon for us if they don't exist. Again, that is mostly located where mangroves will be, so along our southern coast. But you can still get involved. There are chapters around the country, and if you want to donate, of course you can.
That's awesome. I'm going to put some links. We have a lot of people saying, put the links in the chat. They want to check them out. So I'll be putting those links in the chat for you guys to check out. So sadly, this is like going so quickly because there's so much to unpack. So ultimately, we have about 10 minutes. Nia's going to share a little bit more, but I do want to give some time for questions. But I know, Nia, you have a couple actual examples outside of the US. So, you know, Nia is from Louisiana. And so her experience is, you know, and her passion is for the South. And so there are some really critical examples elsewhere, and so I didn't know if you wanted to share those. I know you have a couple.
I do. I seem to have exited out of the picture for it, but the island of Kiribati, it is the most isolated island in the Pacific Ocean. They are basically coral reef. It's basically a coral reef. The island is like basically made up of coral reefs, I believe, and they are heavily impacted by sea level rise, and they have not even contributed to climate change because all their resources are basically localized. So that if you want to look up the island of Kiribati, that is another environmental justice case right there. Mangrove forests are very tropical and temperate, so a lot of them are also found along Southeast Asia. Malaysia is a heavy mangrove forest, actually success story also, because they were able to actually replant a lot of their mangrove forests. So Southeast Asia, for any mangrove forest case studies, if you want to check those out. The island of Kiribati, said Isle de Jean Charles. What are my other examples?
And islands too. As I say, islands
islands in general.
In general, I mean, I know a couple people in the chat were talking about their island, if they're on an island, or that's. I mean, case study is not the correct term, but do look into the communities and see what you can do to help. That was another question. Actually, we got Nia is, what can we do to put pressure on the judicial system? So this is from Sophia. So hi, Sophia. Thanks for the great question. What can we do to put pressure on the judicial system or help get rid of things like Cancer Alley? You know, how can we put you know, kind of pressure that's you know, that's something that you and I have talked about is, and something actually we talk a lot about on the Rise Up webinars is that it's not so much on the shoulders of the people, but putting it back where the pressure is deserved, and that's usually the corporation. So didn't know if you wanted to speak a little bit to that, of what, you know, what we can do to put pressure on kind of our judicial system.
Just basically going off of what you said and what we said earlier, I'm thinking that we need to shift who receives our pressure, like you said, these big corporations, because they have their hands in a lot of lobbying for these. So it's like these communities are coming together, but these companies have already beat us to the punch, if that makes sense. For example, ExxonMobil has a few locations in Cancer Alley, Louisiana. They have ironically, a lot of amazing climate change research, published papers. They have a section, an environmental science section, a climate change section, so that they can study, so that they can kind of beat us to the punch, if that makes sense. So that they know how they're impacting the environment. It's just that they're beating us to the punch when it comes to the lobbying. So I think we should shift our activism a little bit towards, although this is still heavy, we do this, but towards big companies, because they tend to place the blame on us as the consumer, although we do all have we all do impact the planet, but not the individual does not impact it the way these few companies who own all these subsidiaries do. So we have to shift to really, really hone in on these companies, if that makes sense. And that is where I'm still struggling with that question. It's like, okay, so you guys have your hands in the pockets of the judicial system when it comes to lobbying. So we got to really, really we have to impact their money. We have to impact their money. When you want to, in activism, you learn to always find, like, where can we get their attention? You slow down that flow of money. You slow down the flow of money. Coca-Cola is a great example of this, how they are advocating, how they put the blame on the consumer for the plastic production, although we have been asking for a long time to switch to glass bottles because glass is infinitely recyclable. But we have to impact the flow of money that goes to these companies that have a hand in how these policies play out.
Yeah, don't be afraid to flex your consumer muscle.
Exactly.
You have the
Exactly.
power. Your vote with your dollars. Vote,
You
actually vote, because
Yes.
that's, that was going to be my one tip is, we got to vote. We got to vote for the people who represent
Exactly.
the future that we deserve, that we need, that we want to share with our children. We got to vote. We got to vote for those people. And I also wanted to shout out Matthew in the comments too. He said, please focus on the community funds that go directly into the hands of the affected people. A lot of nonprofits get funds tied up and not directly to the communities that need the wealth.
Yes.
That's so critical.
That is so critical. We have to follow the money. It can be daunting, but we have to follow the money.
Yeah.
And there's enough out there to fix our issues. That's what I've learned from this pandemic. Like, there is enough money out there to really, really fix everything.
Yeah. I know we're running out of time. We have some great questions. You guys are putting so many good questions in the chat, in the Q&A box. Marina wants to know, so shout out Marina. Hi, can you comment a little on how do you think the pandemic will affect future climate policies? Do you think it would be better, worse, or make no difference?
This pandemic has really shown those injustices when it comes to these environmental policies. I'm so sorry, I have doggies. I have mixed feelings because we see these injustices. We see how we're stressing, like those of us in the environmental world, because it's hurricane season and the South is getting impacted negatively by the pandemic. But it's like, there's like those of us who see, and then those of us who see it but choose not to believe it, who thinks all this is opinion. So I am very mixed on that. I do feel like, because I am seeing a lot of changes I didn't think I would see for environmental, for just policies in general. So I do believe that we will have environmental change with this to hopefully benefit the vulnerable communities who will get wiped out by this. But I also do see a lot of pushback at the same time. So it's like we're gaining ground, and at the same time, we're retracting with the opposite, those who oppose, who think all of this is an opinion. So I feel 50-50 on that, but I do see lots of gain, like lots of momentum and positive change for the future going forward post-pandemic, for most of us who do believe in the pandemic.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. We do have one more question. I do want to get you guys Nia's contact info. She's amazing. Please check her out on Instagram. These conversations will continue to happen there.
Yes.
So definitely give her a shout out, and DM her any questions if you have any. But I do have one more question for you. But I want to share my screen quick so that I can give you Nia's information.
Should I stop share?
I think. There we go. I'm like, maybe yes, no. Like I said, give Nia a shout out on social media, because she's awesome. Give her a follow, and definitely have a conversation. I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm most appreciative, both for the Rise Up webinars, but the different things that we've been doing while at home, is that I've had so many more conversations and learned so much about different communities around the world that need our love, need our attention, need us to help uplift and share their stories. And Nia does a great job doing that. So, like I said, please give her a follow. But the last question that we have, Nia, because this is going so fast.
This went so fast. Oh my God.
Yeah, like it, just like my superpower, snapping and trash goes away. It's gone that fast. But something that I want to ask you is, how do we start telling the story? So like I kind of alluded to earlier, before you and I chatted, I don't know if I truly felt the depth And I can't even come close, I think, to, you know, what the people actually in New Orleans felt. But you gave me a little piece of that, and I will forever carry that with me. Remember it, take action for it, and help spread your message. But how do you tell the story? How do we tell the story of hopefully mitigating these events from happening in the future? How do we tell people using stories like this, and convey the importance of taking action, in a way? You know, sometimes I think, especially with climate change, anything disaster related, people are like, yep, it's not happening to me.
Exactly.
They don't see it. So how do we tell these stories? How do we message so that when we're telling, we see our next friend, right? You see one person right after you're watching this. What do they say? How do we tell more people about this to where they take action?
I think centering these stories, because they're seen again as so other. Like we were talking about earlier, if it's not a cinematic universe, then like it's hard to get people to have compassion and empathy for this. I like, although I experienced Katrina, I didn't know that so many people were impacted by, like, say, tornadoes or mudslides, like 2 examples. So just talking about these stories more in general so that people can hear them, because I still feel like people are just like, oh, you know, this doesn't really happen. Like, it happens like other countries, or yeah, this happened once in 2005. Like, no, like telling more of these stories, amplifying these stories, actually making that kind of like the center of environmental movements, so you can hear how people are actually impacted versus reading about it in like a pamphlet or a textbook or an article, so that you can see the humanity behind this, the actual, how this is impacting actual people, not just like throwing out statistics.
Yeah.
Because that can people can't relate to statistics. They're going to connect to other people. So making it, being able to connect it to other people's lives is how we're going to bring about change, I believe.
Yeah.
Because when we don't talk about climate change from the point of stories yet. We don't talk about climate change from the point of people's stories. We talk about it from the point of the scientific facts and statistics. So adding that, which is what I did with my senior project thesis, I added my story, and then I went on to describe like all of the actual facts behind why this happened, why this led there. So we gotta throw in the stories. We gotta center the stories so that people can hear, wow, this is actually happening. I read about the stats, I read about the facts, I read about the sea level change, but I'm actually seeing the human that's impacted by this.
Yeah. So. No, that's beautiful. Last question for her, and then we will send you on your way. But a favorite question here at the Rise Up webinar is, if you had the world's attention for 30 seconds, what would you say?
Oh gosh, okay. Oh my gosh, okay, I actually just put myself on my phone. Climate change is real. This pandemic is real. We have to act. We really have to actually fight this, because we only have about 6 months to do something that will mitigate it. And once we take that painful first step, we can make real change. Listen to the scientists, listen to the activists, listen to people who are on the front lines. Mm-hmm. Because that's what, listen to the professionals. This is not an opinion. This is, no matter how we feel about it, it's still going to be here.
Yeah.
That's just what I gotta say about what's happening. Listen.
That's so good. No, that's perfect. I didn't even tell her I was going to ask this question. So how beautiful. That's it. It's you said it perfectly. Nia, I cannot thank you enough for spending your Wednesday with us, for sharing your story, because I can't imagine how hard it is to relive every time you tell it. So I just thank you. I thank you all for watching, being with us. Keep doing what you're doing. I promise you, our planet's going to thank you, no matter what it is, big or small. So please give her a follow. She's awesome. We love her. Nia, thanks so much for being with us. And I hope
I can drop my email. I think someone said to drop if I had an email. It's oh gosh, what's my email? oceanstardrops@gmail. That's my other email. So oceanstardrops.
I just am seeing the chat. I was like, wait, what's happening? I'm just now seeing the chat. There's so much love for Nia in the chat. This is so fun. Yeah, Nia, I was gonna say, definitely if you didn't get her email, DM her, and she'll give you a lot of love back. She'll respond. So
yes, I will. I'm typing it right now because I should have. You asked me if I wanted to add my email. People want my email.
Screenshot that. And yeah, like I think someone said, I think Matt said, follow and support. That's huge, right? That's and there's so many others, and there's so many people. Give them your love, give them your attention, support in any way that you can. So.
Because it's so hard talking about this because I'm always scared of how people would react. But thank you for accepting the story, because it's very, very tough trying to get these stories heard. So thank you. I feel much more comfortable even speaking about it right now. So
yeah. Thanks everyone for your love. This is awesome. Thanks so much, Nia. We will see you at the next one, guys.
Okay.
Bye.